friends. Welcome to the Three Pillars podcast with your host, Griselda Barreto. Aviation. Today we have Captain John Hoyte, who is one of the veterans in the journey of aerotoxic syndrome. And let me give you a short description of who he is. So John Hoyte began flying in 1976 on unpressurized aircraft until 1989, when he changed to fly BAE, which is the British Aerospace 146 jets, with pressurized bleed air for safety and good long-term stability with TNT on night freight flying. He suddenly experienced debilitating ill health in the spring of 1990, which he put down to night flying and told no one for fear of losing his job. He left night flying in 1998 as he was burnt out and experienced severe neurological symptoms of memory and poor speech, and decided to begin day flying on the BAE 146 for Flybe. By then he was more like a vegetable, but he still told no one about his condition as he needed his job. The mystery ill health intensified until 2004-2005, when he felt safe by walking off airliners as a BAE 146 training captain rather than risk his passengers' lives, as he was burned out and unfit to fly. In early 2006, he was tested along with 26 other Balper Union pilots by University College London, all of whom had a cocktail of chemicals in their blood and fat, including organophosphates and poor cognition. On 22nd May 2006, John Hoyte made a formal statement that he had been poisoned by organophosphate and other chemicals. On 18th June 2007, he founded the Aerotoxic Association to help other survivors, and the website aerotoxic.org continues to support others around the world with unsupported financial gain. Hi, John. Welcome to the Three Pillars. I'm so glad you could join us today. Before we start, can I just ask you to, introduce yourself to our listeners?
Sure, yes, of course. Hello. So my name is John Hoyte, and I'm a professional pilot, and I began flying in 1976, so quite a long time ago. And initially I flew unpressurized aircraft, training aircraft, and then did other work, but always below 10,000 feet and in unpressurized air. And in 1989, I decided I wanted a safe job for the future. So I, not unsurprisingly, went for airline flying because I thought that would be a nice, safe job into my later years. So I began flying the BAE 146 in 89, and that was flying all over Europe. And of course, this is a pressurized aircraft. So now the air is being pressurized. You can go up to 30,000 feet in these aircraft. So that was some good fun initially. I really enjoyed it, and it was working for a parcel delivery company and flying all over Europe. So, but then after 6 months, I suddenly experienced very serious ill health. And, so I was a very fit 35-year-old and suddenly became very ill. And I couldn't understand it. I was night flying at the time, but I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my family or a doctor or anybody. I just kept going, as you do. And so I carried on flying for about, 9 years, night flying. But by the time I left night flying, I was so ill, I just could barely speak. And, you can still fly an aircraft relatively safely, but there's something seriously wrong with your health and you don't know what. So that's when I went into day flying, because I kind of thought night flying was very dangerous and, affecting my health. So then I took up a job day flying, and that's what I did for about another 7 year. And of course, the symptoms continued. There was no change. In fact, it got worse and worse until the point in 2005's time, 2004-05. And that's kind of when I failed safe. I think all air crew know when they shouldn't be flying. And after 16 years of 146 flying, I just was in a really bad position. So that's when I stopped flying. And then I had about 6 months of, difficulty trying to work out what was going on. And that was really hard, actually, that 6 months. And then in 2006, I started to find out, the reason for my ill health. And maybe you'd like to know more about that later, but that's basically me.
Yeah, sure. Can you tell me how your life was before you actually got sick? I mean, were you doing normal things? Did you have any health problems or issues, or were you just fine,
I was absolutely fine. I'm very lucky. I come from a very healthy family. I think some people have
Mm-hmm.
just got good genes, and my mum is still 95 and going
Wow.
strong. So yeah, so I'm just one of these lucky people. Even now I'm
Yeah.
relatively okay compared to how I was when I was flying. But yeah, so before 1989, I was
Mm-hmm.
absolutely in perfect health, and yeah. And then even for about 6 months on the 146, I was in good health. It happened very
Right.
suddenly in a German supermarket one day. I remember walking down the aisle and suddenly these, strange neurological symptoms started, and that was the beginning of it. And
Yeah.
it was quite shocking
And
actually when
and
it first started.
what were your symptoms? Can you tell us a bit more about these symptoms that you had?
Yes, you know how when you're drunk, if you've had a lot of alcohol, it's like
Yeah.
that really. It's inebriation, we call it in the UK,
Mm-hmm.
being affected by alcohol because it affects your senses. You feel lack of balance. Had
Mm-hmm.
very hot and cold, actually, mostly hot, very temperature control problems. And then I had the symptoms just rapidly increased. So I had an echo in my head, sort of words pinging around. It was just awful,
Yeah.
actually. Almost too many to mention, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, very confusing. And then I couldn't speak and think properly, and I thought, what's going on? But you can actually fly relatively safely because you've got another pilot with you, and you've got a
Yeah.
checklist. So you just keep going, really. But it was just shocking, really. Yeah, looking back on it.
So, how did you actually discover that you were suffering from aerotoxic syndrome? I mean, did you actually go see a doctor, or did you research about it, or how did you actually come across this illness, let's say?
Okay, so I didn't know when I had it really badly up until 2006, for example. What was going on? I had no idea. All I know is I didn't tell anybody. I was desperate to fly and keep it quiet. So I eventually I was contacted in early 2006 by Captain Tristan Lorraine, who was a Balpa
Mm-hmm.
representative at the time, and he said, "Look, do you want to be tested by University College London because they're doing some investigation into it, and you should be tested." So I agreed to do that because I wasn't flying. I was sort of grounded, age 59. No, 49.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I volunteered to be part of the group, who are tested. And this was 27 pilots in total who were tested by University College London, and that was in the early 2006. I remember it really clearly. It was about 13 years ago now, and we all went
Wow.
down to London. Yeah, and we all had our memories tested. Because they had clever ways of doing it. Really, in a day they could sort of check your cognition, and then they checked our blood and our fat, and then we waited for a few months to find out what they'd discovered. And they told us in May 2006 that we'd all been
Mm-hmm.
affected, all 27 of us, and this was all Balpa pilots, the union. And
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I thought, my goodness. And then, once you realize what's going on, you kind of, you want to find out an explanation because it's been going on for 16 years by now. So you kind of want to get to the bottom of it. So you very quickly go on the internet. And I kind of
Mm-hmm.
worked it out in May 2006, the 22nd of May. That's when I kind of made a statement. But I still didn't know about aerotoxic syndrome because nobody really mentioned that word. So I found out that
Mm-hmm.
in about June 2006. And I couldn't believe it. And it was all written down. They'd identified it in 1999. It had been known about for many, many years. And yeah, I was just the latest case, really. And from that point on, I kind of took an interest in it. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's how I found out about it.
So being a pilot, I'm gonna ask you, could you explain to our listener how the air in the aircraft cabin gets contaminated? This bleed air, that we talk about. Could you
Sure.
simplistically explain it to our listeners?
Okay. Yes, of course. So you remember the earlier aircraft I was flying until 1989 were unpressurized, so you can only go up to 10,000 feet. As soon as you get in
Mm-hmm.
a jet airline, you go up to 30, 40,000 feet, and you need pressurized air. Now, in the early days, they used to take the air from outside and compress it with a pump and
Mm-hmm.
provide the air pressure in that way. But of course, the pumps kept failing because they were quite, in the 50s and 60s, they weren't very well made. So
Mm-hmm.
somebody had the bright idea of using compressed air off the engine because there's so much air within the engine which could be tapped into the aircraft. So that's exactly what they did. In about 1962, they bled or used bleed air from the jet engine. They piped it into the cockpit and the cabin. And from that point on, they had a big problem on their hands because any air going through the engine can get affected by oil within the engine. By design, really, it's waiting to happen. It's a fundamental design flaw. So as the air goes through the engine, it will pick up oil and deliver it unfiltered straight into the cabin. And that's where the problem is, that, it's a fundamental design flaw. And actually, the aircraft I was flying, like most aircraft, have a auxiliary power unit. Now, this is a separate jet engine in the back of the aircraft. And quite often, for the first flight of the day, we'd start the auxiliary power unit up, and the whole cabin and cockpit would fill with white smoke from the early start of the auxiliary power unit. Now, this is just oil smoke, really, and this is visible. So that's what affected me, obviously, when I was flying, because we, started the APU most days, the auxiliary power unit, and that would be the cause of it, really. And you'd open the doors to try and get rid of the smoke, but the damage is done. You're breathing that visible oil smoke. And you don't realize at the time, but it's having a horrendous effect on your body, and that's the most obvious aspect, because it's visible. Whereas mostly, because it's invisible, you can't really see it, and yet it's there all the time.
Yeah, and I know that you were flying on the British Aerospace, the BAE's 146. I remember when I was released on that aircraft type, I had to do 4 legs. So a leg is up and down, so I had to do that 4 times. And I remember the coach that released me, she said, "You're going to have a very long day today, and you're going to sleep really well." And I laughed because I thought she was joking. I was like, "What do you mean I'm going to sleep well?" And she said, "These aircraft, the ventilation system is not very good. So you're going to see at the end of your day, at the end of your 4 legs, that you're going to be completely knackered." And it was true, because I was so tired. And I had flown on other aircraft as well. But the 146 had this, everybody would talk about this aircraft, that they would get really tired. But now thinking back, I'm presuming it's because of, these events or these toxic fumes that you have in the cabin that cause this kind of fatigue.
In a confined space. Yeah.
And
absolutely.
So can we compare these to the fume events or the oil events so that they speak about now? So you had many of these in your career, I'm presuming.
All the time. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all the time. I mean, it's a fundamental design flaw. So but it's normal. You don't know any different. You assume it's all safe, but it's not.
Wasn't there something in your training, or did you report this? Was it like normal airline procedure to report these events, or was it just considered normal?
No, it's normal. You don't report them because they're just part of life. That's a good point, actually. I mean, I did do one flight I think in 2001, where we took off from Birmingham, and the whole cabin of the 146 filled with white smoke in the air. And that was very rare, to actually fill with white smoke. But we declared an emergency and came back and landed. And that was the one and only fume event I had in the air, and over 16 years. But I had many, many, many other times where there was visible fumes in the aircraft, on the ground, etc. But so so that aircraft was the worst of the lot. It really has a terrible reputation.
They're phased out now, right? They don't fly anymore.
I can't believe there's any still flying. I think there are a few. Yes, I know of a few flying, but generally they're uneconomical, and they've got this terrible reputation for being gas chambers. That's what they are, really. They're affecting anybody who flies, passenger or pilot or cabin crew, anybody on board, really. Yeah.
Yeah. So where are you now? How have you recovered? Are you still in recovery, or have you completely recovered from, all the contaminants that your body has breathed in, let's say?
I'm so much better than I was. I mean, in 2004-05, I was like a zombie, like a vegetable, like most people. You're at the end. So, there's no comparison to how I am now to then, because now I can speak, I can talk to you and think, and that's incredible. I couldn't do that 12, 13 years ago. So, but I was very lucky. I met this doctor who said, "Look, what you must do is you must stop flying. If you keep flying, you'll never, ever recover. You've got to stop flying, stop the exposures," because she understood it. And this is Dr. Sarah Myhill. And I thought, okay, and what else? And she said, well, you've got to eat well, you've got to sleep well, and you mustn't take any medication, any antidepressants, any of that stuff, because it's not going to help. And really, after 2 years, you should start to detoxify and get back to your sort of former health, really. I thought, wow, that's good. Just wait 2 years and your body should recover itself. And that's exactly what I did. And actually 2 years later, I started to feel a little bit better, because when you're ill, you're like half dead. It's not a nice feeling, really. So yeah, so any improvement is noticeable. And now,
Yeah.
in comparison, I've been flying again, actually, in light aircraft. So yeah, I have recovered, but yeah, but it's been a tough time. It really has.
So what would your advice be to the younger generation, to the junior pilots taking on this job? And basically to passengers as well, because, we always talk about crew, but we always forget the passengers because they go through the same things that we are going through, and they're not told about it, or they aren't aware that it's dangerous to them. So what would your advice be for people in general?
Well, I think people have got to be really careful, because, as I understand it, about somewhere between 20 to 30% of the population are affected by this thing. And that's the thing. It's a lottery, and they can check it. Because a few years ago, the doctors seemed to be able to work out who would be affected and who wouldn't. And, I was clearly affected, and they predicted it. So if they wanted to, they could actually prove who's going to be affected. And it's about 20 to 30% of the population, which is a huge number of people. But of course, some people aren't affected, and you hear, people doing 30 years and don't know what you're talking about, and they're fine.
Mm-hmm.
But for those few, they've got to be really careful. So you must be aware of this, because it'll get you. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what you said earlier, the passengers are absolutely affected. I mean, there's no question. I've had so many testimonies over the years from groups of passengers. There was a famous flight in 2007 where about 60 passengers all at once were fumed. And yeah, unsurprisingly, it affects children, pregnant mothers, the whole lot. Absolutely, yeah.
And what is your viewpoint on the government and the regulators and the industry? Are they doing enough to improve things? What do you think?
No, they're not. No, because they absolutely know that they have a duty to the public, and they're actually protecting the industry at the moment. They're sort of, but they know what's coming. There's so much evidence now that they're sort of on the back foot a bit, because, there are solutions available now, and EasyJet, companies like that, will put filters in, and they will be protecting their crews and passengers in the future. So, they're not stupid. You come back in a few years' time, and all these solutions will be in place, because they do exist, and it's kind of common sense to put the solutions in if they can. And yeah, that's what they're going to have to do very shortly.
Yeah. I have to say, when I discovered aerotoxic syndrome and all the, ill health effects associated with flying a couple of years ago. And when I went online and I started researching, I think your website, aerotoxic.org, was one of the first that I actually started reading. And I was completely amazed with all the information I found there. So tell me a little bit about your journey on how you decided to help the community and to get the word out there, because you actually you are the founder of Aerotoxic Association. So tell us a little bit of how you got on that journey and what you've done for the community.
Okay. So in 2006, I was absolutely shocked when I found out, what had been causing my ill health all that time. And then I quickly realized that lots of my colleagues had the same thing. It doesn't take long for you to work out that many, many other people are affected. Different airlines, different companies, different jobs. But they've all got the same problem, neurological problems. And, the doctors are mystified by them. So I was just horrified by 2007. I kind of thought, they know all about it. It's kind of not very difficult to work out. But of course, people need help. So I kind of thought, well, the only way to do it is to start a website, really, and publish, really black and white evidence, and keep the emotion out of it. Just sort of publish papers on there and keep it really professional. So that's what I've tried to do over the years. And so I started the website in 2007, June the 18th. And it's been going ever since, really. And, it's a very hard thing to keep going, because nothing changes. It just builds up more and more. But, it's sort of overwhelming evidence for anybody who cares to watch and look at what's happening, really. So, and the Aerotoxic Association, I just had an inquiry this morning from a Boeing 737 pilot, and, exactly the same symptoms of fatigue and complete sort of mysterious ill health, very healthy person, but and they they begin to understand what's going on, and they want some help, and that's that's what I felt I wanted to do as soon as I found out about it, to try and help other people, really, because I think we all have a duty to do that, really.
Sure. Yeah, and I believe you self-funded everything since 2007.
I have, yes, and it's kind of wiped me out, really, because it's been expensive, because I spent 10 minutes trying to connect with you this evening because I'm just not a technological person, really. So, so
Yeah,
even
no, I get it.
simple things is, I don't know, it's just really hard, actually. So,
Yeah, I think it would be unfortunate if we, lose that source of information that we have from your website. I do believe, I mean, I've heard that you actually you've started a funding project online to be able to support the site. Could you tell us something about that? Because I think this is really one of the good causes that people should support, and I'm all for it. So if you could tell us something about it, and the listener, if you could help and support, I think this is one of the things that they should do. So just tell us something about your funding project, please.
okay, so yeah, I need help with these things, and it comes at a price, websites and complicated technical things, and so money's always the sort of bit of an issue, and it's definitely the website's helped a lot of people over the last 12 years, is it? So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
so it'd be really, I don't know, just running the membership is quite difficult. So if people can contribute, that would be hugely appreciated, really. And it's not a lot of money, really. I mean, if for example, I don't know, 2,000 people all chipped a euro into the pot, I mean, that would make a huge difference. So that's kind of what we're looking for.
True.
Not
Yeah.
a lot of money from each person, but just yeah, because that's the only way it can be done. And it's hard because the other side have got unlimited resources, the airline industry and the oil companies and the governments. I mean, they've got so much money to throw at it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's kind of an unequal battle, but we just stick to the truth and stick to the published papers, and try and keep it professional, really, as we did
Yeah.
our jobs. It's pure logical. It would be greatly appreciated.
Good, good. So what I'll do is I'll put all the links to your so this funding project that you've actually begun. I'm going to put it in the description of this episode. So if people want to actually chip in, I'm sure they can find more information in the description, and hopefully we'll get some people to help out there.
Oh, that's
I
very
also
kind. Thank
hear
you.
that's my pleasure. I also hear that you have or you organize simulator sessions. Is that true?
Yes, that's right. So I actually went back to flying in 2014 in light aircraft because all pilots love flying. I mean, they hate being grounded and unwell. So I did get my license back briefly for a private license, and then I just realised how I wasn't really able to fly safely. So to get around this, I started flying simulators in 2015. And of course, the great thing about simulators is you can fly them in any weather. It can be bad outside, but you can have nice weather in the simulator. So it's a good fun thing. And of course, it's flying with the public and sharing flying and enjoying it. So that's what I've been doing for the last 4 years, really, which is huge fun. So yeah, I started the company, and it's kind of allowed me to keep flying, but very safely, because of course you don't have poisonous fumes to worry about or anything like
Yeah.
that.
And
So
and where
it's
is
good
your
fun.
company? Sorry, where is your company based?
So I live in Norfolk in the United Kingdom, and the company's based at Felthorpe Airfield, which is near Norwich. And
All right.
yeah, and I have some great times with people. And of course, the great thing is you can tell them all about aerotoxic syndrome. And just yesterday, this chap came along and he told me about his relation, who's a airline cabin crew. And guess what? Been flying 15 years, grounded, complex problems, doesn't know what's wrong with her. And it sounds incredibly similar to what I've got and what many other people have had. So, every day you're kind of talking to people and listening carefully and thinking, wow, that sounds the same as I had, really. So it's
Hmm.
still going on today. It's a scandal. It really is. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, what do you see the future like? I mean, what could be ways to improve the situation that we are in right now? Like I heard about EasyJet. You said something about EasyJet, but what are the solutions that we have for aerotoxic and the illness?
Okay, well, there are three key solutions. The first one is which EasyJet have actually done. They've changed the oil to a less toxic formulation. So they did this a couple of years ago. So that's quite easy to change the oil. And many companies have changed to Nico oil, which is
Hmm.
considered to be slightly safer than the other oils. So that's quite an easy change, really. And many companies have done that. But of
Hmm.
course, the key thing is filtration of the bleed air, because at the moment it's not filtered at all. It's just coming straight off the engine. unfiltered into the cabin, and that's about 50% of the air is unfiltered bleed air. Now, any oil in the engine will just get conveyed straight into the cabin, really. So it makes sense to filter the bleed air. So that's what the next thing is to do. And and it'll cost a lot of money, and it's not an easy thing to do. Everybody knows that hot air is difficult to filter, and the filters block up and all the rest of it. So it's an almost possible thing to do, and it is a part solution, because the only real solution is to take the air from outside, which what they did in the first place in the 1950s, and that's of course what the Boeing 787 does. It uses air which is from outside, so it can't be contaminated with an engine oil. And so that's the only real solution. But in the meantime, filtering the bleed air is the next logical thing to do. And then the third thing, and a really important thing, is to put poison or chemical detectors in the aircraft. Because at the moment, the only way of knowing if the air is toxic or causing problems is to sniff it with your nose and smell it and think, well, is this poison or not? Well, that's not a very clever way to do it in 2019. There should be technical ways of assessing, the organophosphates and poison in the air. And that's the third thing which they'll do at EasyJet, is put monitors in the aircraft so that the pilots and cabin crew, can actually see what's in the air, and that's kind of obvious too. So those are the three fixes.
Good. And reporting, of course. So if they have these events, they should report it as much as they can. So that
Sure.
it's shown that, it is an event that happens often and something needs to be done. My last question was, what do you propose? Are there any ways of healing or alternative therapies that people suffering from it can actually use?
Well, there are, and people might like to go on to Aerotoxic Team, which is another website on the net with Bea Beaumont, and she's very good at helping people. So, myself, I'm kind of been grounded for 13 years, and I'm not a doctor or anything, but clearly, stopping the exposures is the key thing. Sadly, you have to stop flying. You have to actually, take yourself away. So that's the key thing. And then detoxification and just eating well and sleeping well, that seems to be important. But yeah, there's quite a few doctors out there now who can help people. And so it's become quite difficult over the last few years, because they're still maintaining there's not a problem. So, but you have to trust yourself and know that you're unwell and your body isn't right. You have to sort of make some big decisions, really, to get back to health, really. And avoiding, modern day medicine, because antidepressants, they're hardly going to make you better, really. If you already got poison inside you, by taking further, medicine, which is not going to help, so just avoiding medicines, really, I think.
Yeah. Something else that they often say is that you have a burnout. So they have a lot of excuses to why you feel sick, like fatigue and burnouts and depression and things like that, which sometimes isn't the actual cause. Yeah. Good. So it was really nice talking to you, John. Very nice. Could you tell the listener how they could contact you if they need more information from you?
Yeah, sure. So the Aerotoxic website is always available, www.aerotoxic.org. And you can find my email on there, which is john.hoyte, Hoyte, @aerotoxic.org. And that's my email address. Very pleased to hear from anybody. And, I can always refer them on to other people to help them. That's the key, because and then there's some good Facebook groups at the moment, and they can also help people. They're sort of groups which can help on the internet. And it comes to the point where you kind of get better and you kind of think, oh, okay, I've got better, but I don't know how to help all the other people. There must be millions of people out there suffering. They need a few more doctors to understand this thing. I think that's what it really needs.
Yeah. Good. But you've started really well. You're like a veteran, I'd say, in this whole fight against aerotoxic and things like that. So you've already done a lot, and bravo, good job done. And I'm really happy that I'm really happy I had you on the show today. Is there any last advice or anything more information that you'd like to share with our listener?
I like the way you say listener, single.
Listeners.
So, well, it's just a real thing. We probably noticed last week there was some interest in the UK because I think 5 airline companies have been sort of put on the spot by the union, Unite. They've got some legal cases and they're going to pursue them through the courts. This is real thing. This is not in people's imagination. This is really going on. So the future's going to be really interesting, and really all the airline companies have to do is to face up to it and sort of stop putting their heads in the sand really and deal with it, because they know it's going on. It's just unbelievable how it's lasted for so long really without, they've got away with it really. Like a massive cover up.
Amazing. I know I heard about that, the union, the 5 airline companies and things. That's amazing. So it is hitting home. It has taken some time, but I'm still really positive that, we're going to get there. Hopefully soon, but we'll get there. But John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's a great pleasure.
And I hope to have you back on again with more information at a later date if you're not busy.
Yes.
But thank you very much.
Always pleased to help.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, John. Have a lovely evening then.
Great pleasure.
And thank you very much, John. Bye-bye.
Bye, Griselda. Bye.
Thank you for joining the 3 Pillars. See you next week.